Hello everyone. Welcome to the What If Anime YouTube channel. Today, we're diving into an exciting new story that will take your imagination to the next level. Let's get started. What if Tobirama never dies and he adopt newborn Naruto? Subscribe if you enjoy the video. Blood streaked across Tobirama Senju's armor like crimson lightning against silver clouds. The second Hokage's breath came in ragged bursts, each exhale sending plumes of condensation into the frigid mountain air. Behind him, for young shinobi, barely more than children, huddled in the shadow of a massive boulder, their eyes wide with terror and desperate hope. "Hokage-sama," Hiruzen Sarutobi whispered, his teenage face a mask of anguish. "Let us stand with you." Tobirama didn't turn. His attention remained fixed on the narrow mountain pass ahead, where 20 Kumobikure Elite, the infamous Kinkaku force, would appear at any moment. The trap had been masterfully set. Only his unparalleled sensory abilities had detected its seconds before they would have all been slaughtered. "No," Tobirama replied, his voice calm despite the death sentence he just pronounced upon himself. "Someone must survive to protect the village." His hands flew through a rapid sequence of seals. Not the flying thunder god technique his brother's students expected, but something else, something forbidden. Something he'd created but never dared use. "Hokage-sama." Danzo began to protest. "Enough." Tobirama's voice cracked like a whip. "I am appointing Hiruzen as the third Hokage. All of you will return to the village immediately." The young shinobi flinched as if struck. Tobirama softened his tone, just barely. "This is my final command as your Hokage." A whisper of movement caught his attention. The enemy, closing in faster than anticipated. No time left. Tobirama's fingers completed the final seal of his forbidden jutsu as he turned to face his students one last time. "Go. Protect the village. And tell my brother's legacy that I died with honor." Hiruzen's face crumpled, but he nodded, backing away. Hamura and Kohara followed immediately. Only Danzo hesitated, his single visible eye narrowed with something unreadable. Suspicion? Jealousy? Calculation? Then he too disappeared into the forest. The moment they vanished from sight, Tobirama's chakra exploded outward. Not in attack, but in execution of the most complex technique he'd ever created. From his fingertips erupted a perfect physical duplicate of himself, a corpse clone with his exact appearance, down to the fresh wounds and blood spatter. The clone dropped lifeless to the ground as Tobirama himself activated a space-time ninjutsu of his own design, a variant of the flying thunder god technique that didn't require a marker. The world blurred around him as he vanished, not to safety, but to a place where death might still find him, just not at the hands of Kumobikure's assassins. Pain. Excruciating, all-consuming pain greeted Tobirama as reality reassembled around him. He materialized in a dark chamber, collapsing immediately onto a cold stone floor. The teleportation had succeeded. Barely. But the chakra cost combined with his existing injuries had pushed him beyond even his formidable limits. Blood pooled beneath him, black in the darkness. His vision swam, consciousness flickering like a candle in a storm. With trembling fingers, he reached for the storage scrolls secured at his waist. His final contingency plan. "Kai," he whispered, his voice a rasp of its former authority. The scroll unfurled with a whisper of paper against stone, releasing its sealed contents. Medical supplies, soldier pills, and scrolls containing healing jutsu, techniques he'd developed through years of research, inspired by his grandniece Tsunade's nascent medical interests. Not enough to save him if he'd been with his team. The Kinkaku force would have finished him before he could apply a single bandage, but perhaps enough to prevent him from bleeding out here, alone in the darkness. As he worked to stabilize his condition, Tobirama's mind remained disciplined despite the fog of pain. The corpse clone would convince the Kinkaku force, and more importantly, his students, of his death. Hiruzen would become the third Hokage. The village would mourn, then move forward, and Tobirama Senju would vanish from history. It had not been a spontaneous decision. For months, he had sensed the gathering shadows, the coalescing forces that would soon plunge the shinobi world into another devastating war. He had prepared this hidden sanctuary, an ancient Senju outpost beneath what Konoha now called the Forest of Death, and stocked it with everything needed for a lengthy seclusion. Not because he feared death, but because he feared what would happen to his brother's dream without his vigilance. He had seen the hunger in Danzo's eyes, the darkness that could so easily corrupt Hashirama's vision of peace. He had noticed the growing tensions between villages, the petty grievances that threatened to erupt into catastrophe. Most of all, he had recognized his own failure to create a system that could sustain peace beyond the lifetime of its founders. The world believed the god of shinobi, Hashirama Senju, had been succeeded by his brother, the cold and calculating Tobirama. Few understood that Tobirama's apparent coldness was not absence of feeling, but iron discipline containing a tsunami of grief, doubt, and determination. As consciousness began to slip away, Tobirama activated a final seal, one that would keep his chakra signature completely masked, even if he lost consciousness. His last thought before darkness claimed him was not of the village he had helped build, nor of the brother he had lost too soon. It was of a promise, whispered to Hashirama's grave in the dead of night. I will protect your dream, brother, even if I must become a ghost to do so. 3 days later, Tobirama opened his eyes to the soft glow of phosphorescent fungi that lined the ceiling of his underground sanctuary. He was alive, barely. The medical techniques had stabilized his most life-threatening injuries, but full recovery would take weeks, perhaps months. He forced himself to sit up, muscles screaming in protest. The chamber around him was vast, far larger than anyone would expect to find beneath Konoha's forest. Ancient Senju symbols decorated the walls, marking this as a place dating back to before the village's founding. A place known only to him and Hashirama, and with his brother's death, to him alone. Tobirama had expanded it over the years, adding storage areas, living quarters, and most importantly, a research facility that would have shocked even his closest advisors. Here, away from judgmental eyes, he had pursued knowledge that others might consider forbidden, not out of thirst for power, but out of determination to protect the village from threats it couldn't yet imagine. Water style, cleansing stream, he murmured, forming seals despite the pain that lanced through his chest with each movement. A gentle spray of water materialized above him, washing away dried blood and grime. Such a simple jutsu, yet even this caused sweat to bead on his forehead. He was weaker than he'd expected. With painstaking slowness, he began to redress his wounds, methodically working through each injury. 2 broken ribs. A deep laceration across his left shoulder. Burns along his right arm where an enemy's lightning jutsu had grazed him. Chakra exhaustion so severe that his pathways felt scorched from within. As he worked, his mind remained locked on the decision that had brought him here. Faking his death had not been an impulsive choice born of desperation in that mountain pass. It had been the culmination of months, years, of growing certainty that the village system was fundamentally flawed, that perhaps the only way to truly protect Hashirama's dream was from the shadows, unbound by the politics and compromises that had increasingly frustrated his efforts as Hokage. The first cracks had appeared during the negotiations with the Uchiha. Tobirama had agreed to give them authority over Konoha's police force. A position of prestige, yes, but also a subtle way to separate them from the village's broader governance. He had told himself it was necessary, that the lingering distrust between Senju and Uchiha required careful management. But in his most honest moments, he recognized his own prejudice. The Uchiha had killed his brothers, all but Hashirama. And somewhere deep within, that wound had never fully healed. Now, as he sat bleeding in a hidden chamber beneath the village, Tobirama faced that truth with the same unflinching clarity he applied to all things. He had failed to transcend the cycle of hatred that had defined the shinobi world for generations. And if he, raised by Hashirama, committed to peace, could not overcome it, what hope was there for the village? Perhaps, he whispered to the empty chamber, I can do more good dead than alive. The idea crystallized with sudden, startling clarity. As Hokage, he had been constrained by protocol, by politics, by the need to represent not just his own vision but the collective will of the village. As a ghost, a shadow observing but never seen, he could move freely. Protect the village not through official channels that enemies could anticipate, but through means no one would expect from the legendarily straightforward second Hokage. Tobirama closed his eyes, extending his sensory abilities upward, through layers of stone and earth, to the village above. The effort sent fresh waves of pain through his depleted chakra network, but he pushed through it with characteristic determination. Konoha pulsed with life, thousands of chakra signatures, each unique as a fingerprint. He found Hiruzen's immediately, steady and strong in the Hokage tower. The boy, no, the man now, was already shouldering the burden Tobirama had placed upon him. Nearby, the darker, more turbulent signature that belonged to Danzo lingered like a storm cloud. And elsewhere, scattered throughout the village, the distinctive Uchiha chakra, tinged with fire and passion even at rest. They believed him dead. The entire village mourned, their collective grief a tangible weight even from this distance. Tobirama withdrew his senses, suddenly exhausted. Let them mourn. Let them move forward, believing the era of the Senju brothers had ended. In the shadows, he would watch. He would wait. And when necessary, he would act. Weeks passed, then months, then years. Tobirama's injuries healed, leaving new scars to join the collection that already mapped the history of his battles across his pale skin. His underground sanctuary expanded as he worked tirelessly, creating a network of hidden passages that allowed him to move unseen beneath the village and the surrounding forest. He developed new jutsu focused on concealment and observation rather than the direct combat techniques he had favored as Hokage. He created shadow clones with chakra signatures so suppressed that even the most skilled sensors in the village couldn't detect them, using these clones to gather intelligence in the village above. And he watched as Hiruzen grew into his role as the third Hokage. Watched as the boy he had trained became a man worthy of the title, if perhaps too willing to see the good in others, too hesitant to act decisively against potential threats. Tobirama observed the Second Shinobi World War from his subterranean exile, fingers itching to intervene as his students, now adults with students of their own, fought and died on distant battlefields. He nearly broke his self-imposed isolation when news reached him of Hiruzen's students confronting Hanzo of the Salamander. Only iron discipline kept him in the shadows when he learned that 3 orphans from Amagekure had been taken under Jiraiya's wing. The Third Shinobi World War tested his resolve even further. From his network of clones and carefully placed surveillance seals, Tobirama learned of a young Namake's Minato, whose adaptation of the Flying Thunder God technique rivaled his own mastery. He watched with something approaching pride as this golden-haired jonin shattered battlefield after battlefield with the jutsu Tobirama had created, earning the moniker Yellow Flash just as Tobirama had once been called the White Demon. Through it all, he continued his research, delving into forbidden techniques and classified knowledge with the freedom of a man unbound by institutional constraints. He created jutsu that would have been deemed too dangerous for even the Hokage to authorize. He compiled intelligence on every major shinobi village, building a more comprehensive understanding of the political landscape than anyone who relied on official channels could hope to achieve. And he watched the Uchiha with particular attention, noting with growing concern how the village's distrust of them deepened with each passing year. The seeds he had planted with the police force had grown into a full garden of isolation. Fertilized by fear and watered with mutual suspicion, Tobirama found himself at war with his own legacy. The systems he had created as Hokage, the academy, the ANBU, the mission classification structure, had solidified into institutions that now seemed immutable, their original purposes sometimes lost beneath layers of tradition and bureaucracy. The separation of the Uchiha, intended as a temporary measure until trust could be built, had calcified into systematic discrimination. In his underground sanctuary, surrounded by scrolls and research that would shock even his closest former advisors, Tobirama came to a humbling realization. He had built structures that embodied his own flaws. His tendency toward pragmatism over idealism, his instinct to control rather than trust, his willingness to sacrifice the few for the many, all were reflected in the village that had grown from the systems he designed. And yet, he could not bring himself to emerge from the shadows. To do so would create chaos, undermining Hiruzen's authority, and throwing the village into turmoil at a time when unity was more crucial than ever. The myth of the second Hokage's noble death had become a foundation stone of Konoha's identity. To shatter it now would be to risk the entire structure. So he remained hidden, a ghost haunting the periphery of his own creation, watching and waiting for a moment when intervention might do more good than harm. That moment came closer than he expected when rumors reached him of Danzo's new initiative, a program called Root, operating in the shadows of even the ANBU, answerable only to Danzo himself. Tobirama's surveillance seals in the Hokage Tower captured heated arguments between Hiruzen and his old teammate, revealing depths of manipulation and ambition that confirmed Tobirama's worst fears about Danzo's evolution. He came within a hair's breadth of revealing himself then, of emerging from the underground to confront the darkness growing in his former student's heart. Only the certainty that doing so would trigger a civil conflict within Konoha stayed his hand. Instead, he redoubled his efforts to monitor the village unseen, placing surveillance seals in locations even the ANBU didn't know existed, creating shadow clones that could pass undetected among the population. He became the village's unknown guardian, a silent sentinel whose existence was suspected by none. And then came the night that changed everything. The night when a malevolent chakra, all too familiar to Tobirama's senses, descended upon Konoha with catastrophic fury. The nine-tailed fox. Tobirama felt it before he saw it. A sudden, overwhelming pressure that made the air itself seem to thicken. His eyes snapped open in the darkness of his underground chamber. Body instantly alert despite having been in deep meditation moments before. That chakra. Impossible to mistake. The nine-tails, Kyubi, was active. And close. He surged to his feet, crossing to the far wall where an intricate seal array served as both surveillance system and alarm. The seal glowed angry red, confirming what his senses had already told him. Catastrophe had come to Konoha. Without hesitation, Tobirama activated a transportation seal, vanishing from his sanctuary and reappearing in a hidden observation post he'd established in the forest canopy above. The night air hit him like a physical blow, thick with malice and the acrid stench of destruction. The sight that greeted him stole the breath from his lungs. Konoha, his brother's dream, his own legacy, lay partially in ruins. In the heart of the village, a monstrous form towered above the tallest buildings. 9 tails lashed against the night sky, each movement demolishing structures that had stood since the village's founding. The beast's roar shook the very earth, a sound not heard in Konoha since Madara's attack decades ago. But something was wrong. Tobirama's eyes narrowed as he extended his sensory abilities toward the rampaging beast. The 9 tails chakra felt different, distorted, as if something, or someone, was manipulating it. A flash of movement caught his attention. Atop the Hokage monument, a figure stood facing the beast. Even at this distance, Tobirama recognized the distinctive white coat and blonde hair of the 4th Hokage, Namikaze Minato. In an instant, Tobirama made his decision. For the first time in decades, he would directly intervene in Konoha's affairs. Not openly, the chaos of the attack would provide sufficient cover for his presence, but enough to understand what was happening and, if necessary, to act. He formed a single seal, summoning a shadow clone with suppressed chakra signature. Observe only, he instructed. Under no circumstances reveal my existence. The clone nodded and vanished, moving toward the heart of the village. Tobirama himself took a different direction, following the distinctive chakra signature of the 4th Hokage, who had disappeared from the monument in a yellow flash. What Tobirama witnessed over the next hour would haunt him for years to come. From the shadows, he observed Minato's desperate battle against a masked attacker, an Uchiha, without question, though none that Tobirama recognized. He watched as Minato severed the mysterious assailant's control over the 9 tails, forcing a retreat. He tracked the 4th Hokage's movements as he returned to the village, confronting the rampaging beast directly. And then, with growing horror, Tobirama realized what Minato intended to do. The dead demon consuming seal. A forbidden technique that would cost the user's life. For a crucial moment, Tobirama hesitated. He could intervene. With his knowledge of space-time ninjutsu, he might be able to offer an alternative. But to do so would mean revealing himself, shattering the carefully maintained illusion of his death, potentially destabilizing the village at the moment of its greatest vulnerability. Before he could decide, events accelerated beyond his control. The 9 tails' massive form disappeared in a flash of light, sealed into Tobirama's senses strained, an infant, Namikaze's own child, if the similar chakra signature was any indication. And with the sealing, 2 bright flames of chakra guttered and died. The 4th Hokage and a woman with the unmistakable Uzumaki life force, Kushina, Minato's wife, both gone, their lives sacrificed to save the village and contain the beast. Grief and rage surged through Tobirama with equal force. Grief for the fallen Hokage, for the potential loss, for the orphaned infant who now carried a burden no child should bear. Rage at the masked Uchiha whose manipulation had caused this catastrophe. His shadow clone dispersed, returning with disturbing intelligence. Danzo was already moving, consolidating power in the chaos, whispering to the council about the danger the infant Jinchuriki represented. Hiruzen, aged beyond his years by the wars and now this tragedy, had reassumed the mantle of Hokage. But his authority was being subtly undermined even before the fires of the attack had been extinguished. Tobirama withdrew to his underground sanctuary, mind racing as he processed everything he had witnessed. The attack had not been random. The masked Uchiha had targeted Minato and Kushina specifically, had known exactly when the seal containing the Nine Tails would be at its weakest. This had been planned, meticulously, patiently, by someone with intimate knowledge of Konoha's defenses and the nature of Jinchuriki. And now an orphaned infant, the fourth Hokage's legacy, lay at the center of a political storm, his very existence already being framed as a threat rather than a sacrifice that had saved the village. Tobirama's decades of self-imposed isolation suddenly seemed not like discipline, but like cowardice. He had watched from the shadows as the village he helped create strayed further and further from Hashirama's vision. He had observed but not acted as the seeds of distrust he had planted bloomed into full-grown hatred. He had remained hidden while others paid the price for systemic failures he had helped institute. No more, he whispered to the empty chamber. He would not reveal himself. Not yet. The village was too fragile, the power dynamics too precarious. But neither would he remain a passive observer. The time for action had come. First, he needed to understand what had happened to the infant Jinchuriki. Minato would not have sacrificed his life and his child's future without some plan, some hope for the boy's protection. Yet already Tobirama sensed the currents of fear and hatred swirling through the village, directed at a newborn who had no choice in his fate. He created another shadow clone, this one with explicit instructions to infiltrate the temporary shelter where orphans from the attack were being housed, to find the infant and assess his situation. What the clone reported back hours later chilled Tobirama to his core. The child, Naruto, named after a character in Jiraiya's novel, lay isolated from the other orphans. The staff assigned to care for him did so with barely concealed resentment and fear. Already, whispers spread through the shelter. The demon child, the monster who destroyed our homes, killed our families. Hiruzen had passed a decree forbidding anyone from speaking of the Nine Tails sealed within the boy. But such prohibitions only drove the fear underground, where it festered and grew stronger. The third Hokage intended to protect Naruto by hiding his identity as a Jinchuriki. But in doing so, he had only ensured the boy would face hatred without understanding its source. More troubling still were the machinations Tobirama's surveillance detected among the village elders and council. Danzo, in particular, spoke of the weapon that must be properly controlled, of the asset that should be developed under Root's guidance, of the threat that must be contained before it could mature. Tobirama found himself facing a terrible parallel to his own past decisions regarding the Uchiha. Once again, fear was driving policy. Once again, separation and control were being presented as necessary evils for the greater good. And once again, a child would bear the consequences of adults' failures. For nights after the Nine Tails attack, Tobirama's surveillance seal in the Hokage Tower captured a heated council meeting. Danzo proposed removing the infant Jinchuriki to a secure facility, ostensibly for the child's protection. But Tobirama recognized the hunger in his former student's voice. Hiruzen resisted, but other voices joined Danzo's. The argument escalated until a compromise was reached. The child would remain in the orphanage, but under ANBU's surveillance. His status as Jinchuriki would remain secret from his generation, and the boy himself would not be told of his burden until deemed ready. It was, Tobirama recognized with grim certainty, a path to isolation as complete as any prison cell Danzo might have proposed. The child would grow up alone, feared without knowing why, watched but not protected, unless someone intervened. The decision crystallized in Tobirama's mind with sudden clarity. After decades of watching from the shadows, of questioning his own legacy without acting to change it, he would take a direct hand in shaping Konoha's future. Not by revealing himself, not by challenging Hiruzen's authority, but by saving a single child from the fate that short-sighted fear had decreed for him. He spent the next 3 days preparing. He expanded his underground sanctuary, creating a space suitable for raising a child. He gathered supplies, clothing, food, books, toys, using transformation techniques to move undetected through the recovering village. He devised training schedules, education plans, contingencies for every eventuality he could imagine. On the 7th night after the attack, when a skeleton staff maintained the orphanage and the assigned ANBU guard rotated shifts, Tobirama Senju emerged fully from his decades-long seclusion and moved through Konoha like the ghost he had become. The orphanage's security was designed to keep threats out, not to prevent someone from taking a child few wanted to acknowledge existed. With techniques he had perfected over decades of covert observation, Tobirama slipped past outer guards, disabled alarm seals, and made his way to the isolated room where the infant Jinchuriki lay alone. Naruto Uzumaki slept fitfully, tiny fists clenched as if already fighting the world that had rejected him. The seal on his stomach, Minato's final masterpiece, glowed faintly in the darkness, visible to Tobirama's trained eyes. A perfect 8-trigram seal, designed not just to contain the 9 tails, but to gradually integrate its chakra with the boy's own. Ingenious, Tobirama murmured, studying the construct with professional admiration. He meant for you to master it someday. The infant stirred at the sound of his voice, blue eyes blinking open to stare up at the stranger looming above his crib. For a moment, Tobirama expected tears, a wail that would alert the guards. Instead, tiny hands reached upward, grasping at air as if trying to touch the red marks on Tobirama's face. Tobirama hesitated, decades of emotional distance making this simple human connection feel foreign. Then, with careful precision, he lifted the child from the crib. "I failed this village once," he told the infant, who regarded him with solemn blue eyes. "I created systems based on fear rather than trust. I isolated those I should have integrated. I valued efficiency over humanity." Naruto grabbed one of Tobirama's fingers, grip surprisingly strong for one so small. "I will not fail you," Tobirama promised. "You will know your heritage. You will understand your burden. You will have the tools to master both. And when the time comes, you will return to this village not as the demon they fear, but as the protector they need." With the child secure against his chest, Tobirama formed a single seal with his free hand. In a whisper of displaced air, both the legendary second Hokage and the orphan Jinchuriki vanished from the room, leaving behind only an empty crib and a note. "He will return when Konoha deserves him." By morning, the village would be in uproar. Anbi would scour every corner of Konoha and the surrounding forests. Tracker ninjas with their hounds would find trails that led nowhere. Rumors would spread. The demon child had shown its true nature and escaped. Enemy ninja had stolen the forest's legacy. The 9 tails had broken free and vanished into the night. None would suspect the truth, that Tobirama Senju, long believed dead, had claimed the child as his own. That in the shadow depths beneath the forest of death, a new chapter in Konoha's history was beginning, one that would remain unwritten for many years to come. In his underground sanctuary, Tobirama laid the sleeping infant on a bed prepared days in advance. The seal on the child's stomach pulsed gently, the 9 tails chakra swirling within its confines like a storm contained in a bottle. "Rest, Naruto Uzumaki," Tobirama said softly. "Tomorrow, your training begins." Outside, dawn broke over a wounded but surviving Konoha. Citizens emerged to continue rebuilding, shinobi departed on missions to maintain the village's strength, and in the Hokage Tower, Hiruzen Sarutobi stared at the empty crib and mysterious note, a terrible suspicion forming in his mind. The future had been irrevocably altered. The wheels of destiny, knocked from their ordained path, began to turn in a new direction. And deep beneath the forest of death, the legendary second Hokage and the 9 tails Jinchuriki slept, each drawing strength from the other's presence. The disappearance of Tobirama Senju had shaped one era of shinobi history. The disappearance of Naruto Uzumaki would shape the next. Crimson chakra slashed through the night sky like a bleeding wound. Tobirama Senju froze mid-step on the hidden pathway he'd carved beneath Konoha decades ago, his senses suddenly overwhelmed by a malevolent pressure that made the very air vibrate. The sealed tunnel, reinforced with jutsu that had endured for a generation, cracked around him, dust spiraling in the wake of raw power that shouldn't exist in the world of humans. "The 9 tails," he whispered, recognition immediate and horrifying. 30 years of self-imposed exile evaporated in an instant. The second Hokage surged upward, his body flickering through sealed passages that hadn't seen human presence in years. He burst from a hidden exit in the northern forest, landing in a crouch atop a massive oak that offered an unobstructed view of Konoha. His brother's dream, his own failure, burning. The demon fox loomed over the village like a mountain of malice, each of its 9 tails demolishing entire city blocks with casual sweeps. Blood-curdling screams punctuated the night, harmonizing with the beast's earth-shattering roars. But beneath the chaos, Tobirama's heightened senses detected something else. A thread of familiar chakra weaving through the catastrophe. Uchiha, he hissed, his eyes narrowing. Not just any Uchiha chakra, but something disturbingly reminiscent of Madara himself. A yellow flash at the edge of his vision pulled Tobirama's attention to the Hokage monument. The 4th Hokage, Minato Namikaze, stood facing the beast, his white coat billowing like a war banner. The young leader's chakra burned fierce and determined, but Tobirama instantly recognized the grim calculation in his stance. He's planning to sacrifice himself. Decision crystallized in Tobirama's mind. After decades of watching from shadows, he would intervene. But his movement halted before it began. A masked figure materialized behind Minato, radiating chakra that confirmed Tobirama's suspicions. This was the Uchiha he'd sensed, the puppet master behind the Nine-Tails attack. The 2 shinobi vanished in a yellow flash. Minato's signature technique, one he'd adapted from Tobirama's own jutsu. The former Hokage cursed silently. Direct intervention now would create chaos atop catastrophe. Tobirama slammed his palm against the tree trunk, summoning a shadow clone. Track the 4th. Report everything. Do not engage. The clone nodded and disappeared, while Tobirama himself launched toward the village center. He flew through a series of hand signs, summoning 3 more shadow clones. Observe the council, the ANBU headquarters, and Danzo, he ordered. Full surveillance protocol. As his clones scattered, Tobirama raced toward the epicenter of destruction, maintaining a complex chakra suppression technique that rendered him invisible to all but the most determined sensors. Tonight, he would witness but not intervene, unless absolute necessity demanded it. What he saw over the next 3 hours would haunt him for years to come. Minato Namikaze died a hero's death, and created an orphan in the same stroke of brilliance and sacrifice. Tobirama watched from the canopy of a shattered forest as the 4th Hokage and his wife, Kushina Uzumaki, impaled themselves on the Nine-Tails claw to protect their newborn son. Their final act was the sealing, a masterpiece of Fuinjutsu that imprisoned the demon fox within their child, Naruto. The infant's wails cut through the sudden silence as the beast vanished, leaving only destruction and a tiny, whisker-marked boy at the epicenter of devastation. ANBU operatives emerged from the shadows, gathering around the child with expressions ranging from awe to undisguised revulsion. Take him to the Hokage, one ordered, hesitating before touching the screaming infant. Tobirama shadowed them, his presence undetected as they transported Naruto to the emergency command center established in the still-standing academy building. There, Hiruzen Sarutobi, aged beyond his years and wearing the Hokage robes he'd surrendered to Minato, received the child with grief etched in every line of his face. Minato and Kushina? He asked, though the answer was written in the seals spiraling on the infant's stomach. Dead, the ANBU captain confirmed. Along with hundreds of others, Hiruzen cradled the child, whose cries had subsided to whimpers. Naruto, he murmured. They named him Naruto. Danzo Shimura materialized from the shadows at the edge of the room, his visible eye fixed on the infant with calculating intensity. The Jinchuriki must be secured immediately, he said, the word falling like a death sentence. The weapon, the child, Hiruzen corrected sharply, will be protected. Protected? A harsh laugh escaped Danzo. That thing contains the power that just decimated our village. Half our forces are dead or wounded. The hospital is overflowing. And you speak of protection rather than containment? Hiruzen's gaze hardened. I speak of honoring Minato's sacrifice. This boy is his legacy, and Kushina's. His parentage is irrelevant, Danzo countered, stepping closer. What matters is what he contains. The Nine-Tails must be controlled, studied, harnessed. My root division has protocols for. Enough. Hiruzen's voice cracked like thunder. There will be a full council meeting at dawn. Until then, the child remains under my direct protection. Tobirama, concealed by jutsu and shadow, studied his former student's face. Decades had transformed the promising young shinobi into a bitter old man, twisted by paranoia and thirst for power. Something in Danzo's expression, a fleeting calculation, a momentary tightening around his concealed eye, triggered alarm in Tobirama's mind. He won't surrender so easily, Tobirama realized. Whatever he's planning, it begins tonight. As the confrontation between the third Hokage and his advisor continued, Tobirama slipped away, following the distinct chakra signature of one of Danzo's rude agents as they exited the building. The operative moved with unnatural efficiency, avoiding patrols and civilians alike, making directly for the underground passages beneath the Hokage mountain. Tobirama's shadow clone, assigned to monitor Danzo's activities, melded with him as he tracked the agent, transferring crucial intelligence. Root operatives had been mobilizing since the moment the Nine Tails appeared, not to defend the village but to secure strategic positions and assets. They had accessed sealed archives during the chaos, removing documents related to Jinchuriki and the Uzumaki clan's sealing techniques. Danzo prepared for this, Tobirama realized with cold fury. Not the attack itself, perhaps, but he's been waiting for an opportunity like this. The root agent he followed entered a hidden bunker, where Tobirama observed a dozen black-masked operatives preparing a containment chamber. A prison cell disguised as a nursery, ringed with suppression seals and monitoring jutsu. A cage for the Nine Tails host, Tobirama thought grimly. For Minato's son, he'd seen enough. With practiced efficiency, Tobirama withdrew, his mind racing through calculations and contingencies. He would not allow Danzo to subvert Minato's sacrifice, to turn a child into a mindless weapon. But direct confrontation would throw Konoha into civil war at its most vulnerable moment. His decision crystallized. Observe, gather intelligence, and prepare to act when the moment demanded it. That moment came sooner than he anticipated. Dawn broke over a shattered Konoha, golden light illuminating destruction that rivaled the worst battlefields of the shinobi wars. Civilians emerged from shelters, shinobi continued rescue operations, and in the Hokage Tower, hastily repaired with wood-style jutsu by surviving Senju descendants, the village council convened in emergency session. Tobirama observed through a surveillance seal he placed decades ago, when he still officially led the village. The seal had remained undetected through 3 Hokage administrations, allowing him a window into Konoha's highest-level deliberations. Hiruzen entered the chamber with the infant Naruto in his arms, a statement of intent that immediately polarized the room. Murmurs rippled through the assembled elders, clan heads, and advisors. Is it wise to bring the Nine Tails into this chamber? Hamura Midokado, once Tobirama's student, now a village elder, asked with evident discomfort. I bring Minato and Kushina's son before the council, Hiruzen replied evenly. A child who, through no choice of his own, now carries the burden of containing the Nine Tails. A burden that poses immeasurable danger to what remains of our village, Kohara Yutane countered. The Jinchuriki must be. His name, Hiruzen interrupted, is Naruto Uzumaki. Danzo leaned forward, his single visible eye fixed on the infant. Names are irrelevant. What matters is security. The Nine Tails broke free from its previous host, Kushina Uzumaki, an adult with full training and containment techniques. What protection do we have against the same occurring with an untrained infant? Minato's seal, Hiruzen answered. A masterwork of Fuinjutsu that not only contains the Nine Tails but gradually integrates its chakra with the boy's own. Given time and proper training, Naruto will not merely contain the beast, he will master it. And until then? Danzo pressed. What happens tomorrow, or next week, or next year, if the seal weakens? If the child's emotions trigger a release? We cannot risk enough fear-mongering, Suminazuka interrupted, her canine partner growling softly beside her. The 4th Hokage gave his life creating that seal. Are we to second-guess his skill now? This isn't about questioning Minato's skill, Fugaku Uchiha said, speaking for the first time. It's about acknowledging reality. The village lies in ruins. Our forces are decimated. We cannot afford another catastrophe. Murmurs of agreement followed his statement. Tobirama noted the subtle positioning taking place. Danzo aligning with Fugaku despite his historical distrust of the Uchiha clan, temporary alliances forming around shared fear. What do you propose then? Hiruzen asked, his voice deliberately calm. Danzo seized the opening. The Jinchuriki, Naruto, should be placed in a secure facility, under constant ANBU surveillance, with specialized sealing teams monitoring the Ninetales containment. My root division has prepared. Absolutely not. Hiruzen cut him off. I will not consign a child to life as a prisoner. Then what? Fugaku demanded. Will you have him raised in the orphanage? Allow him to attend the academy? Place him in a civilian home? Each option exposes the village to unnecessary risk. The debate raged for hours, positions hardening along predictable lines. Throughout it all, the infant Naruto slept peacefully in Hiruzen's arms, oblivious to the forces shaping his destiny. Tobirama observed the subtle machinations, the political maneuvering disguised as concern for village security. Finally, Hiruzen raised a hand, silencing the chamber. I have heard your concerns. As Hokage, the final decision rests with me. Naruto Uzumaki will be placed in the village orphanage, under discreet ANBU surveillance. He will grow up as a normal child, unaware of his burden until he is mature enough to understand it. And the village? Koharu asked. How do we prevent panic when people realize the Ninetales walks among them in human form? By decree, Hiruzen answered firmly. I am issuing an S-rank law. No one is to speak of Naruto's status as Jinchuriki. Those of you in this room will know. The ANBU assigned to his protection will know. No one else, not the general shinobi forces, not the civilians, and especially not Naruto himself or his generation, will be told. The penalty for breaking this law will be severe. Protests erupted immediately, but Hiruzen remained unmoved. My decision is final. This meeting is adjourned. As council members filed out, Tobirama maintained his surveillance, watching Danzo linger behind with Hamura and Koharu. This is a mistake, Danzo said once the room had cleared. The Jinchuriki should be under Root's control. Hiruzen is Hokage, Koharu reminded him, though her tone suggested she shared his concerns. For now, Danzo replied ominously. But his sentimentality will be Konoha's downfall. We cannot afford such weakness, especially now. Tobirama had heard enough. He withdrew his awareness from the seal, processing what he'd witnessed. The battle lines had been drawn, not on a physical field, but around the future of an orphaned infant. And despite Hiruzen's apparent victory, Tobirama recognized the precariousness of Naruto's position. The orphanage, he thought grimly. Surrounded by those who lost everything to the Ninetales, watched by ANBU who will see the beast rather than the boy. Coveted by Danzo as a weapon to be harnessed. No protection at all. Night fell on Konoha's first day of reconstruction. Emergency shelters housed hundreds of displaced civilians. Medical ninjas worked through exhaustion, healing those they could, comforting those they couldn't. And in a hastily established orphanage, a converted administrative building at the village's edge, dozens of children who had lost parents to the Ninetales waited for a future that suddenly contained neither family nor certainty. Among them, isolated in a room that had once been a storage closet, lay Naruto Uzumaki. Tobirama materialized from shadow, his chakra suppressed to near non-existence as he observed the infant through a ventilation grate. The boy slept fitfully, tiny body twitching with dreams no newborn should have. The seal on his stomach pulsed with subtle fluctuations of chakra. Minato's design working as intended, gradually integrating the Ninetales' power with the child's own developing chakra network. A sound in the hallway alerted Tobirama to approaching footsteps. He withdrew deeper into shadow as the door opened, admitting a young woman in civilian clothes, an orphanage caretaker, her face drawn with exhaustion and something darker. She carried a bottle of formula, approaching the makeshift crib with visible reluctance. Time to feed the demon, she murmured, her voice flat with resignation and suppressed fear. Tobirama's muscles tensed at her words, but he remained hidden, observing. The woman lifted Naruto with mechanical efficiency, avoiding eye contact as she positioned the bottle. The infant latched on immediately, hunger overriding his previous restlessness. As he fed, his tiny hand reached up, grasping at the woman's finger with newborn reflex. She flinched as if burned, nearly dropping him. Don't, she whispered, tears suddenly streaming down her face. Don't pretend to be human. You killed my husband. You destroyed my home. Naruto continued feeding, oblivious to her words, to the hatred pouring from the very person assigned to his care. They say we can't tell anyone what you are, she continued, voice trembling. We have to pretend you're just an orphan, not the monster that murdered half our village. But we know. Everyone knows. She pulled the bottle away though Naruto had only consumed half its contents. The infant began to cry, the normal, healthy cry of a hungry newborn. The woman placed him back in the crib with haste bordering on roughness. Cry all you want, she said, backing toward the door. No one will come. The door closed, leaving Naruto alone in darkness broken only by moonlight filtering through dusty blinds. His cries intensified, tiny fists waving in distress. Tobirama remained perfectly still, warring with himself. Direct intervention now would compromise everything. His concealment, Hiruzen's authority, what tenuous stability remained in the village. Yet every instinct, every principle that had guided him as Hokage, screamed against allowing such treatment of a defenseless child. Before he could decide, the door opened again. A different figure entered, taller, broader, moving with the disciplined silence of ANBU. The masked operative approached the crib, observing the crying infant with unreadable body language. Quiet, the ANBU whispered, voice neither gentle nor harsh. A hand hovered over the crib, chakra flickering briefly, a minor genjutsu, Tobirama realized, designed to induce sleep. Naruto's cries subsided immediately, his tiny body relaxing into unnatural stillness. The ANB remained for several minutes, watching the child with an intensity that troubled Tobirama. This was not protection, it was surveillance. Monitoring a threat rather than safeguarding a child. When the operative finally left, Tobirama emerged from concealment, approaching the crib with silent footsteps. He dispelled the genjutsu with a subtle flicker of chakra, watching as Naruto's breathing normalized, his small features relaxing into natural sleep rather than induced unconsciousness. This is his future, Tobirama thought grimly. Feared by those assigned to care for him. Monitored rather than protected. Hated for a burden he didn't choose to bear. He extended a sensory net throughout the building, mapping the location of every occupant. The caretakers clustered in a break room 2 floors below, voices carrying faintly as they complained about assignments and expressed relief at distance from the demon child. ANBU operatives maintained perimeter positions, focused outward rather than inward, protecting the village from Naruto, not Naruto from the village. Decision crystallized in Tobirama's mind. He would not reveal himself, would not directly challenge Hiruzen's authority. But neither would he allow Minato's son to suffer this fate. Naruto would disappear. And with him, the 9 tails. Tobirama withdrew from the orphanage, his plans accelerating. He needed preparation, supplies, contingencies. The opportunity would come. He would make certain of it. But rushing would only endanger the child further. For 3 days, Tobirama observed and planned. He witnessed the orphanage staff's neglect of Naruto intensify, feeding him less frequently than the other infants, changing him only when absolutely necessary, avoiding touch beyond the minimum required for basic care. He watched ANBU rotations, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities. Most disturbing, he tracked root operatives circling the facility like vultures, waiting for an opportunity to seize the Jinchuriki for Danzo's purposes. On the 4th night, Tobirama infiltrated the Hokage Tower, accessing sealed records to confirm his suspicions about Naruto's heritage. The documentation was sparse, deliberately so, but sufficient. Naruto was indeed the son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki, the 4th Hokage and the previous 9 tails Jinchuriki. More than that, through Kushina, he was connected to the Uzumaki clan of Whirlpool, distant cousins to the Senju. The boy carried the blood of both Tobirama's clan and his brother's wife's family. Blood of my blood, Tobirama thought, the ancient Senju recognition of kinship stirring something long dormant within him. Not just the Force legacy or the 9 tails container, but family. That night, Tobirama made his final preparations. He expanded his underground sanctuary, creating spaces suitable for an infant. He gathered supplies, formula, diapers, clothing, everything a newborn would require, using transformation techniques to move undetected through the village markets. He reviewed ancient Senju child-rearing scrolls, familiarizing himself with developmental milestones and nutritional requirements. The 2nd Hokage, legendary for his battle prowess and jutsu innovation, prepared for perhaps his greatest challenge, raising a child. His opportunity came on the 7th night after the 9 tails attack. A council meeting drew the highest-ranking officials away from their posts, including Danzo and his closest root operatives. A minor incident in the commercial district, arranged through careful manipulation by Tobirama's shadow clones, pulled ANBU attention away from the orphanage. And inside the facility itself, a shift change left Naruto under the supervision of the most neglectful caretaker, the woman who had called him demon to his infant face. Tobirama moved like the ghost many believed him to be, slipping through Konoha's shadows with practiced ease. He disabled perimeter seals, navigated blind spots and patrols, and entered the orphanage through a service entrance left carelessly unlocked. Within minutes, he stood before the door to Naruto's isolated room. Inside, he found the infant awake but silent, blue eyes staring upward as if he'd learned already that crying brought no comfort. The seal on his stomach pulsed faintly in the darkness, a spiral of intricate fuinjutsu that contained power capable of leveling mountains. "Naruto Uzumaki," Tobirama whispered, approaching the crib. "Son of the fourth Hokage, Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, and abandoned by the village your father died to protect." The infant's eyes tracked to his voice, focusing on Tobirama with unexpected clarity for a newborn. Something in that blue gaze, a hint of determination, a spark of will, reminded Tobirama powerfully of both Hashirama and Minato. "This village has failed you," Tobirama continued, reaching into the crib. "As I once failed it, building structures of fear rather than trust. Perhaps, in protecting you, I can begin to correct both failures." He lifted Naruto with careful hands, cradling the tiny body against his armor. The infant didn't cry or struggle, simply watched Tobirama's face with that unnerving focus. "I am Tobirama Senju," he told the child, a formal introduction worthy of a Hokage meeting a foreign dignitary. "Second Hokage of Konoha, brother to Hashirama the First. The world believes me dead, killed during the First Shinobi World War. From tonight forward, the world will believe you missing. Perhaps dead, perhaps stolen, perhaps merely lost in the chaos following the Nine Tails attack." Naruto's tiny hand escaped the swaddling blanket, reaching upward to touch the red markings on Tobirama's face. The gesture, so trusting, so human, settled something in the former Hokage's mind. "I will teach you everything," he promised. "Not just ninjutsu in combat, but history and philosophy. The truths Konoha has forgotten. The principles that should have guided it. You will know your heritage, both Namikaze and Uzumaki. You will understand the burden you carry, and when the time is right, you will return to this village not as the demon they fear, but as the protector they need." A distant sound alerted Tobirama to movement in the corridor, the caretaker, making her reluctant rounds. With practiced efficiency, he formed a sequence of one-handed seals, simultaneously summoning a shadow clone and preparing for transportation. "Leave the note," he instructed the clone. "Then ensure our departure remains undetected." The clone nodded, placing a small scroll in the empty crib, while Tobirama shifted Naruto to a more secure position against his chest. The infant remained eerily quiet, as if understanding the need for silence. As footsteps approached the door, Tobirama activated his teleportation jutsu. Space twisted around him, chakra bending reality as he and Naruto vanished from the room. From Konoha proper, reappearing deep within the forest of death, at the concealed entrance to his underground sanctuary. "Welcome home, Naruto Uzumaki Senju," Tobirama said softly as he carried the child into the hidden complex that had been his solitary domain for decades. "Your real life begins tonight." Dawn broke over Konoha with screaming sirens and frantic activity. The disappearance of the Nine Tails Jinchuriki triggered emergency protocols across all levels of village security. ANBU teams scoured every district, sensor-type ninjas extended their abilities to maximum range, and tracking specialists with Niken partners crisscrossed the village and surrounding forests, searching for any trace of the missing infant. In the Hokage Tower, Hiruzen Sarutobi stared at the empty crib that had been transported from the orphanage, his aged face drawn with worry and growing suspicion. The small scroll left in Naruto's place lay open on his desk, its message both threat and promise. "He will return when Konoha deserves him." Who could have taken him? Koharu demanded, pacing the office with uncharacteristic agitation. Who even knew what he was, beyond those in the council? The ANBU guards, Hamura suggested. The orphanage staff. Anyone with eyes to see the resemblance to Minato. or the whisker marks that appeared after the sealing. This was not random, Danzo stated flatly, his visible eye fixed on the scroll. This was targeted. Someone who knew exactly who and what the child was. Someone with the skill to bypass the NBU's security and sensory barriers. Someone like you, Hiruzen thought but didn't say, studying his old rival with new wariness. The note suggests whoever took Naruto considers themselves his protector, not his abductor, or wishes us to believe so, Danzo countered. This could be the work of another village. Kumobakure has attempted to acquire Kekkei Genkai and tailed beasts before. The barrier teams reported no foreign chakra signatures entering or leaving the village, Hiruzen replied. And the tracking teams found no physical trail. It's as if the child simply vanished, like someone using the flying thunder god technique, he added mentally, though he kept the thought private. Only one shinobi had mastered that jutsu to the level required for such an operation, and Minato Namikaze was dead, his body burned in a funeral pyre with his wife's just days ago. We must expand the search, Danzo insisted. Every ANBU operative, every available jonin, and announce to the world that we've lost the Nine Tails? Hamura interrupted. We would invite invasion while we're still rebuilding our defenses. Silence fell as the implication sank in. The disappearance of Naruto Uzumaki represented not just the loss of a child or even a Jinchuriki, but potentially an existential threat to Konoha itself. If another village had acquired the Nine Tails, containment, Kohara said finally. We contain this information while continuing the search. The official story will be that the orphan Naruto Uzumaki, not identified as Jinchuriki or the fourth son, has gone missing, presumed taken by looters or opportunists during the chaos. And if we don't find him? Hiruzen asked quietly. Then eventually Danzo answered, we declare him dead. Life continues. The village recovers. And we prepare for the day when the Nine Tails inevitably reappears, whether in Naruto Uzumaki or a new host. Hiruzen looked again at the cryptic note. He will return when Konoha deserves him. Not the language of a foreign abductor or an opportunistic thief. The words of someone passing judgment on the village itself. Continue the search, he ordered, rolling the scroll closed. But quietly. This information does not leave this room. To the village, to the world, Naruto Uzumaki is simply one more tragedy in a week of tragedies. As his advisors filed out, Hiruzen remained at his desk, a terrible suspicion forming in his mind. The precision of the abduction. The untraceable method. The judgment implicit in the note. Who would have both the skill to accomplish such a feat and the moral authority to condemn Konoha's treatment of Minato's son? Only one name came to mind, but it was impossible. The man had died decades ago, sacrificing himself so his students could escape an ambush. His body had been recovered, funeral rites performed, his name carved on the memorial stone. And yet, Hiruzen pulled open his desk drawer, removing a weathered photograph, the only one in existence showing both the first and second Hokage together. Along with a much younger Hiruzen, he studied Tobirama Senju's stern features, remembering the man who had been both teacher and Hokage to him. Impossible, he murmured, returning the photograph to its drawer. Even you couldn't have survived that day. And yet, the doubt remained, settling into Hiruzen's mind like a splinter too deep to remove. If anyone could have faked their death, maintained decades of seclusion, and judged Konoha unworthy of Naruto's presence, it would be Tobirama Senju. The third Hokage gazed out his window at the village still bearing the scars of the Nine Tails attack. If it is you, he whispered, protect him well. And forgive us our failures. Deep beneath the forest of death, in chambers unknown to any living Konoha shinobi, Tobirama Senju adjusted to the reality of caring for an infant with the same methodical precision he had once applied to village administration and jutsu development. Naruto lay in a carefully constructed crib, surrounded by seals designed to monitor his vitals and chakra fluctuations. The Nine-Tails seal operated exactly as Minato had designed, a masterwork of Fuinjutsu that gradually filtered the tailed beast's chakra through Naruto's own system, integrating rather than merely containing. Your father was a genius, Tobirama told the infant as he prepared formula according to specifications in a child development scroll. To create this seal while dying, while watching your mother die, while knowing you would grow up an orphan, it demonstrates a clarity of purpose few shinobi ever achieve. Naruto watched him with those unnervingly focused blue eyes, tiny hands grasping at air. At 1 week old, he should have been capable of little beyond eating, sleeping, and crying. Yet already Tobirama noted anomalies, heightened awareness, unusual muscle control, accelerated healing of the umbilical wound. The Nine Tails influence, Tobirama murmured, lifting Naruto to feed him. Or perhaps Uzumaki vitality combined with Namake's potential. Either way, you are exceptional already. As the infant drank, Tobirama found himself studying the tiny features with growing fascination. The whisker marks on Naruto's cheeks, physical manifestations of the Nine Tails chakra influence during gestation, gave him a distinctly feral appearance despite his otherwise human form. His hair, sparse but growing, showed signs of his father's distinctive blonde coloring. But the shape of his face, the structure of his chakra network, reminded Tobirama powerfully of Kushina and, by extension, Mito Uzumaki, his brother's wife, the first Nine Tails Jinchuriki. You carry more legacies than any child should bear, Tobirama said softly. Son of the fourth Hokage. Last of the Uzumaki and Konoha. Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Each would be burden enough alone. Naruto's tiny hand grasped Tobirama's finger as he fed, grip surprisingly strong. Something shifted in the former Hokage's chest, an unfamiliar sensation he eventually identified as protective instinct. Not the abstract commitment to village security that had guided his tenure as Hokage, but something more primal, more personal. I will not fail you as I failed Konoha, he promised. The village I helped build became a place where a newborn could be hated for circumstances beyond his control, where fear overwhelmed compassion, security trumped humanity. I bear responsibility for that failure. The systems I created, the ANBU, the isolation of the Uchiha, the hierarchies that valued military strength over individual dignity, laid the groundwork for what Konoha has become. Naruto finished feeding, his eyelids growing heavy. Tobirama carefully shifted him to his shoulder, patting the tiny back as he'd seen civilian mothers do with their infants during his years of secret observation. But you, he continued, voice dropping to a whisper, you will grow up understanding both strength and compassion. You will know your heritage, Namake's, Uzumaki, and the legacy of the Nine Tails itself. You will master the power within you rather than being controlled by it. And when the time comes, you will return to Konoha not as the demon they feared, but as the protector they need. Naruto's breathing deepened into sleep, tiny body relaxing against Tobirama's armored chest. The former Hokage remained motionless, an unfamiliar contentment settling over him as he held this child. This convergence of legacies, this embodiment of both Konoha's failures and its potential redemption. Sleep well, Naruto Uzumaki Senju, Tobirama murmured. Tomorrow, your real training begins. In the shadowed council chambers beneath the Hokage Tower, Danzo Shimura sat alone, fingers steepled before his bandaged face. The meeting had concluded hours ago, other officials departing to oversee various aspects of the ongoing search for the missing Jinchuriki. But Danzo remained, his mind calculating possibilities with cold precision. The disappearance of Naruto Uzumaki represented both crisis and opportunity. The loss of the Nine Tails was a significant blow to Konoha's military potential, a weapon Danzo had fully intended to develop under Root's guidance. Yet the vacuum created by that loss opened other avenues, other strategies for consolidating power. Report, he said without turning as a masked figure materialized from the shadows behind him. The ANBU search has yielded nothing, the Root operative replied tonelessly. No chakra trail, no physical evidence. The barrier teams confirm no unauthorized entry or exit from the village during the estimated time frame, suggesting an inside operation, Danzo concluded. Someone with intimate knowledge of our security protocols. Yes, Lord Danzo. We've begun compiling a list of suspects with both the necessary skill level and potential motivation. Danzo's visible eye narrowed. And the Uchiha? Under surveillance as ordered. Their police force has been participating in the search, but several high-ranking members, including Fugaku, have been observed in private meetings since the disappearance was announced. A thin smile crossed Danzo's lips. As expected, the Nine Tails attack presented too great an opportunity for their ambitions. You believe they took the Jinchuriki? I believe, Danzo said carefully, that regardless of who took the child, the Uchiha's behavior warrants closer monitoring. Increase surveillance on the client compound. I want reports on every meeting, every conversation regarding the Nine Tails or the missing child. The operative bowed slightly. And if we determine they were responsible? Then, Danzo replied, his voice hardening, we will have justification for measures I've long considered necessary. As the root agent vanished, Danzo turned his attention to a small scroll on the table before him. A copy of the note left in Naruto's crib. He will return when Konoha deserves him. The phrasing troubled him, suggesting not a kidnapping for power but a judgment against the village itself. Few possess both the ability to bypass Konoha's security and the arrogance to appoint themselves arbiter of the village's worthiness. Fewer still would have specific interest in the Uzumaki child beyond his status as Jinchuriki. A suspicion formed in Danzo's mind, not of Uchiha involvement, despite what he'd implied to his operative, but of something far more improbable. He reached for a hidden drawer in the council table, extracting a dusty folder marked with classification seals decades old. Inside lay mission reports from the First Shinobi World War, including the final operation of the Second Hokage's life. Tobirama Senju's body had never been recovered. The official report, written by a young Hiruzen Sarutobi, stated that the second Hokage had sacrificed himself to allow his team to escape the Kinkaku force. The team had witnessed him engaging the enemy while they retreated, had felt the massive chakra discharge of his final battle, but they had not seen him die. Impossible, Danzo murmured, closing the folder. Even Tobirama Senju, master of water style and space-time ninjutsu, could not have survived that encounter, could not have remained hidden for decades while maintaining surveillance on the village. And yet, as he considered the precise nature of Naruto's disappearance, the untraceable extraction, the judgment implicit in the note, the connection to both the Senju and Uzumaki lineages, Danzo found the impossible becoming merely improbable. If, and it remained a massive if, Tobirama Senju lived, and had taken the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, then Konoha faced a threat far greater than the loss of a potential weapon. It faced the judgment of its own architect, a man whose standards none had ever fully satisfied. Danzo rose, decision made. Contingency Protocol 7, he murmured, activating a communication seal embedded in the table. Minutes later, 3 root operatives appeared, kneeling before him. You have new orders, Danzo told them. Expand the search perimeter to include the deepest sections of the Forest of Death and the cave systems beneath the Hokage Monument. Look for evidence of long-term habitation, chakra residue matching Senju's signatures, or any signs of recently disturbed sealed areas. Lord Danzo, one operative ventured, those areas have been searched repeatedly over the years. The security protocols were designed by the very person you're looking for, Danzo interrupted. This time, search not as Anbu would, but as he would. Think like Tobirama Senju. The operatives exchanged brief glances, a rare display of confusion among rude members. You believe the second Hokage took the Jinchuriki? The senior operative asked carefully. I believe, Danzo replied, in eliminating even the most unlikely possibilities. Carry out your orders with absolute discretion. This operation remains classified even within route. As his agents departed, Danzo returned to his contemplation of the missing Jinchuriki puzzle. If Tobirama lived, unlikely but no longer unthinkable, then his acquisition of Naruto represented something beyond mere power politics. It suggested a purpose, a plan decades in formation, and if there was one thing Danzo Shimura respected, even feared, it was Tobirama Senju with a purpose. Beneath the ancient trees of the Forest of Death, Tobirama's shadow clone dispersed, its gathered intelligence flowing back to the original in his underground sanctuary. The clone had maintained surveillance on the village for 12 hours, monitoring the search efforts and gathering critical information about Konoha's response to Naruto's disappearance. Tobirama processed the influx of memories while preparing Naruto's next feeding. The infant had settled into a surprisingly regular schedule, waking every 3 hours for nourishment before returning to sleep. In the brief periods of wakefulness, Tobirama had begun the most fundamental aspect of his training plan, chakra exposure. They're searching for you, he told Naruto as he mixed the formula with precise measurements. But not as diligently as they should be. Hiruzen has contained the information, limited the search teams to trusted ANBU. He fears what would happen if the world learned the Nine Tails Jinchuriki had vanished. Naruto squirmed in his crib, tiny face scrunching with hunger. Tobirama lifted him with practiced ease, the motion already becoming natural despite his decades without human contact. Danzo suspects, he continued, settling into a stone chair carved with senju symbols. Not with certainty, but he's expanded the search to include this forest. His root operatives are more thorough than standard ANBU. They'll be looking for signs I would recognize. As Naruto fed, Tobirama extended his sensory abilities upward, through layers of earth and stone, mapping the positions of every living creature within a 5-kilometer radius. 3 root operatives moved through the forest above, their chakra signatures distinctive in their emptiness, the result of Danzo's emotional conditioning. They were good, Tobirama acknowledged. Professional, methodical. But they searched for conventional hidden entrances, concealed barriers, the standard methodology of secret bases. They would find nothing. Tobirama's sanctuary wasn't hidden behind genjutsu or sealed doors. It existed in a dimensional pocket he'd created using principles similar to his Flying Thunder God technique. A space that was simultaneously beneath the forest of death and slightly adjacent to normal reality. The only entrance was a transportation seal that activated only for his specific chakra signature. Your first lesson in security, he told the feeding infant. True safety comes not from stronger walls, but from ensuring your enemies don't know where to look. Naruto's blue eyes fixed on Tobirama's face with that unnerving focus, as if absorbing the lesson despite his weak-old intellect. The nine-tailed seal on his stomach pulsed gently, the complex Fuinjutsu processing infinitesimal amounts of the tailed beast's chakra into Naruto's developing network. You're already unique, Tobirama observed. A normal infant would not maintain eye contact at your age, would not display the muscle control you're developing. The nine-tails influence accelerates your development, physical, at least. Cognitive and emotional maturation will likely follow their natural course. He shifted Naruto to his shoulder for burping, mind already mapping out training regimens and educational modules for different developmental stages. The early years would focus on chakra awareness and control, capitalizing on the nine-tails influence to establish foundational skills before conventional training would normally begin. By age 3, basic taijutsu forms to develop coordination and muscle memory. By 5, introductory ninjutsu appropriate to Naruto's chakra nature, once it manifested, all while keeping the child completely hidden from a village full of sensor-type ninja, ANBU trackers, and Danzo's relentless root operatives. A challenge worthy of the second Hokage. Tobirama murmured with grim amusement. Naruto burped, then yawned widely, eyelids growing heavy. Tobirama returned him to the crib, activating a gentle sound-dampening seal to ensure the infant's rest wouldn't be disturbed by his continued preparations. With Naruto settled, Tobirama moved deeper into his sanctuary, entering a vast chamber lined with scrolls and experimental jutsu arrays. Here, during his decades of seclusion, he had developed techniques that would have revolutionized the shinobi world, or terrified it into unified opposition. Space-time manipulations that built upon his Flying Thunder God technique. Water-style jutsu that could extract moisture from living organisms. Sealing methods that could contain not just tailed beasts, but the very essence of chakra itself. Now, these research projects would serve a new purpose, preparing Naruto for his eventual return to a world that had rejected him. Tobirama approached a sealed vault at the chamber's far end, forming a complex sequence of hand signs to release its protections. Inside lay scrolls bearing the combined insignia of the Senju and Uzumaki clans. Collaborative research from the early days of Konoha, when Mito Uzumaki had worked alongside Tobirama to develop sealing techniques for the village's protection. Your heritage, Tobirama said to the absent infant. Not just Minato's legacy or the Nine-Tails' power, but the combined knowledge of the Senju and Uzumaki clans. Knowledge that Konoha has forgotten or suppressed in its fixation on military strength over wisdom. He selected several scrolls detailing early childhood development among Uzumaki children, with specific attention to those with unusually large chakra reserves. The Uzumaki had centuries of experience managing their clan's naturally abundant chakra. Experience that would prove invaluable in raising a child who contained not only Uzumaki vitality, but the Nine-Tails itself. As he studied the ancient texts, Tobirama's mind returned to his surveillance of the village. The search for Naruto had already begun to wane, resource constraints forcing Hiruzen to prioritize reconstruction over finding one missing orphan, even an orphan of Naruto's significance. Only Danzo maintained focus, his root operatives methodically expanding their search pattern. But even Danzo would eventually abandon the effort. The demands of village security, the ongoing tensions with other shinobi nations, the internal politics of Konoha, all would gradually supersede the search for a missing Jinchuriki. In time, Naruto Uzumaki would become a footnote in Konoha's history, a tragic consequence of the Nine-Tails attack, perhaps even a cautionary tale about the dangers of sealing-tailed beasts into human hosts. By the time Naruto was ready to return, he would be not a missing child, but a ghost stepped out of legend. Tobirama smiled thinly at the thought. He understood ghosts better than most. He had been one for decades. A soft cry from the adjoining chamber interrupted his research. Tobirama set aside the scrolls and moved with swift efficiency to Naruto's crib. The infant's face was scrunched in distress, tiny body rigid with discomfort. "Nightmare?" Tobirama murmured, lifting Naruto carefully. Or perhaps the Nine-Tails making its presence known. He extended his sensory awareness toward the seal on Naruto's stomach, probing gently at the interface between the infant's chakra and the imprisoned tailed beast. The Nine-Tails remained securely contained, but its chakra roiled with malevolent intent, pushing against the seal's inner boundaries like a caged predator testing for weakness. Already trying to influence him, Tobirama noted with clinical interest. Even at this age, he formed a one-handed seal, channeling a precise thread of his own chakra into Naruto's system, not to suppress the Nine-Tails, which would interfere with Minato's carefully designed integration process, but to soothe the infant's distress at the foreign sensation of the tailed beast's chakra. Naruto relaxed immediately, his cries subsiding to whimpers, then silence. Blue eyes blinked open, focusing on Tobirama's face with that unnervingly adult awareness. "You felt it," Tobirama said, not as a question but as confirmation. "Good. Awareness is the first step toward control. Better to know your burden from the beginning than to discover it in moment of crisis, as too many Jinchuriki have." He settled into the stone chair, cradling Naruto against his chest. The infant's tiny hand reached up, grasping at the fur collar of Tobirama's armor with surprising strength. "You will not fear the Nine-Tails," Tobirama continued, his voice taking on the measured cadence he had once used to teach jutsu theory to his students. "Nor will you embrace it blindly. You will understand it, its nature, its power, its hatred. You will acknowledge these things without being defined by them." Naruto's eyes drifted closed, his grip on Tobirama's collar relaxing as sleep reclaimed him. But Tobirama remained seated, studying the infant's features in the dim light of the underground chamber. "You are not the Nine-Tails," he whispered, a promise to the sleeping child. "Nor are you merely Minato's son or Kushina's legacy. You are Naruto, and you will define yourself through your own choices, not through the circumstances of your birth or the burden sealed within you." As if in response, Naruto sighed in his sleep, tiny body nestling more securely against Tobirama's chest. The former Hokage found himself smiling, a genuine expression that felt foreign on features long set in stern discipline. "Rest well," he murmured. "Tomorrow, we begin." 1 month after Naruto's disappearance, the search officially ended. In the Hokage's office, Hiruzen Sarutobi signed the final order with a heavy heart, officially classifying the case as unresolved, presumed deceased. The document would be sealed in the village archives, accessible only to future Hokages and the highest-ranking intelligence officials. "Are you certain this is wise?" Kohara asked, watching her old teammate with concern. "To abandon the search entirely." "We haven't abandoned anything," Hiruzen interrupted, his voice weary beyond his years. "ANBU will maintain alert status for any intelligence regarding the Nine-Tails or unusual chakra signatures matching Naruto's profile. But we cannot continue dedicating resources to an active search when the village remains vulnerable to attack." "And the official story?" Hamura inquired. "Remains as established," Hiruzen replied. Naruto Uzumaki, orphan of the Nine-Tails attack, disappeared during the post-attack chaos. Presumed victim of opportunistic kidnapping or accident. A tragedy among many tragedies. Neither of his advisors mentioned what all three knew, that the disappearance of the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki represented far more than the loss of one orphaned infant. It potentially shifted the balance of power among the 5 great nations, creating vulnerability that Konoha's enemies would exploit if they discovered the truth. "There is one other matter," Kohara said after a moment. Danzo's independent investigation. Hiruzen's expression hardened. Root has been instructed to cease all operations related to Naruto's disappearance. The resources are needed elsewhere. And will Danzo comply? Hamura asked, the question hanging in the air like a kunai. He will, Hiruzen stated with uncharacteristic firmness. Or face consequences that even he would find unpleasant. The threat wasn't empty. In the months since Naruto's disappearance, Hiruzen had gradually reasserted authority that had weakened during his initial retirement. The Nine-Tails attack and Minato's death had forced him to reclaim the Hokage position with renewed vigor. And with that reclamation came a hardening of resolve against those who would undermine Konoha's stability, including his old rival. As his advisors departed, Hiruzen moved to the window, gazing out at a village slowly rebuilding from catastrophe. Cranes rose above damaged districts. Construction crews worked from dawn to dusk. Civilians and shinobi alike contributed to recovery efforts, their shared purpose temporarily bridging the gaps that had widened in peacetime. Where are you, Naruto? He murmured to the empty office. And who has taken you? The mystery haunted him. The note left in the crib. He will return when Konoha deserves him, suggested not an enemy action but a judgment. Someone who believed they acted in Naruto's best interests, protecting him from a village that might have feared or hated him for the burden he carried. Someone with the skill to bypass ANBU security, to leave no trail for even the most accomplished trackers, to disappear with a Jinchuriki without triggering any of Konoha's considerable alarm systems. The list of shinobi capable of such a feat was vanishingly small. Those who might also appoint themselves arbiter of Konoha's worthiness smaller still. Hiruzen's gaze drifted to the Hokage monument, where four faces watched over the village. Hashirama, the founder, whose dream of peace had created Konoha. Tobirama, the architect, whose systems and structures had shaped that dream into functional reality. Hiruzen himself, who had inherited stewardship of both dream and reality. And Minato, whose brief tenure had ended in ultimate sacrifice. Could it be? He whispered, the impossible theory that had haunted him for weeks resurfacing. Could you have survived, Tobirama-sensei? The monument offered no answer, the second Hokage's stone face as impassive as it had been in life. Hiruzen shook his head, dismissing the thought as wishful thinking, or perhaps fear. If Tobirama Senju had somehow survived the Kinkaku force ambush, had observed Konoha for decades from the shadows, had judged it and found it wanting. What did that say about Hiruzen's own stewardship of his teacher's legacy? Wherever you are, Naruto, Hiruzen said softly, I hope you are safe. I hope you are loved. And I hope, someday, you will return to us, not as weapon or symbol, but as a shinobi of Konoha, as your father would have wished. In the drawer of his desk lay a small box containing items salvaged from Minato and Kushina's home. Photographs, personal letters, a three-pronged kunai with special sealing formula, keepsakes meant for their son when he was old enough to learn his heritage. Now, they would remain sealed away, waiting for a return that might never come. Hiruzen turned from the window, resolve settling over him like his Hokage robes. The village would recover. It would rebuild. It would prepare for whatever the future held, including, perhaps, the return of a child who carried both the Nine-Tails power and the judgment of whoever had deemed Konoha unworthy of him. We will be ready, Hiruzen promised the absent infant. We will become worthy. Deep within the forest of death, in the dimensional pocket that housed Tobirama's sanctuary, Naruto Uzumaki reached his first major developmental milestone. Extraordinary, Tobirama murmured, watching the 1-month-old infant push himself up on his forearms, head lifting to track the former Hokage's movement across the chamber. Such control typically emerged at 2 to 3 months in normal infants. But Naruto was proving anything but normal. The Nine-Tails influence accelerated his physical development, while his Uzumaki heritage provided natural vitality that manifested in rapid healing and surprising stamina. Already, Naruto remained awake for longer periods than most infants his age, observing his surroundings with alert blue eyes that seemed to absorb every detail. Tobirama had adapted his plans accordingly, implementing the first phase of training earlier than anticipated. Each day now included dedicated sessions of chakra exposure, controlled periods where Tobirama released precise amounts of his own chakra into the environment around Naruto, acclimating the infant to the sensation of external energy. You feel it, Tobirama observed as Naruto's head turned toward a subtle pulse of water-natured chakra. Already sensitive to the elements, even without formal training, the infant gurgled in response, a sound that might have been mere biological function but seemed almost conversational in context. Tobirama found himself responding as if to a rational question. Yes, water-nature chakra. My primary affinity, though I mastered all 5 basic elements during my time as Hokage. You will likely inherit your father's wind nature, your mother's water affinity, or some combination influenced by the Ninetales' presence. Naruto's tiny hands clenched and unclenched, his face scrunching with concentration as if trying to replicate the chakra pulse he'd sensed. Tobirama watched with scientific interest, recording observations in a scroll dedicated to tracking the infant's development. Subject demonstrates heightened chakra sensitivity at 1 month. Responds to elemental chakra pulses with focused attention and apparent recognition. Attempts to engage with external chakra sources through physical movement, suggesting instinctive understanding of the connection between physical and spiritual energy. Each day's observations added to Tobirama's understanding of this unprecedented situation. Raising a Jinchuriki from infancy, with no external influences to complicate the training process. No academy instructors imposing standardized methods. No peer interactions creating emotional variables. No village politics limiting what techniques could be taught. Pure, controlled developmental guidance from the architect of Konoha's shinobi education system. You will surpass them all, Tobirama told the infant as he lifted him for the afternoon feeding. Not because of the Ninetales, though you will master its power. Not because of your Uzumaki or Namake's heritage, though both bloodlines carry tremendous potential. But because you will receive training untainted by fear or politics or tradition for tradition's sake. Naruto latched onto the bawa with characteristic hunger, tiny body relaxing in Tobirama's practiced hold. The former Hokage settled into his stone chair, continuing his monologue as the infant fed. I created Konoha's academy to standardize shinobi education, to ensure consistent quality across generations. But standardization has its costs. Individual potential gets sacrificed for predictable outcomes. Innovation yields to established technique. The systems I built have calcified, becoming rigid where they should remain adaptive. Tobirama's free hand absently traced the edge of the fur collar that had become his signature as Hokage. You will learn not just jutsu, but the principles behind them. Not just techniques, but the theory that enables creation of new techniques. You will understand chakra as I understand it. Not as a tool to be used, but as an extension of will and intent, limited only by imagination and control. Naruto's eyes remained fixed on Tobirama's face throughout this discourse, his gaze so focused, so seemingly comprehending, that the former Hokage sometimes forgot he addressed an infant rather than a student. And you will learn what I failed to teach Konoha, Tobirama continued, voice softening. That strength without compassion becomes tyranny. That security purchased with fear ultimately creates greater insecurity. That systems must serve people, not the reverse. As he spoke these words, philosophical principles rarely associated with the pragmatic second Hokage, Tobirama recognized how his decades of solitary observation had transformed his own perspective. The young Hokage who had created ANBU, who had isolated the Uchiha, who had prioritized village security above individual concerns, had watched those decisions ripple through generations, creating unintended consequences that undermined his brother's original dream. I cannot correct those mistakes directly, he told the feeding infant. To reveal myself now would create chaos, weakening the village at its most vulnerable moment. But through you, through the shinobi you will become, perhaps those errors can be addressed. Not through destruction of what exists, but through demonstration of what could be. Naruto finished his formula, eyes growing heavy as contentment replaced hunger. Tobirama shifted the infant to his shoulder, patting gently until a small burp escaped, then laid him in the crib for his afternoon nap. As Naruto drifted to sleep, Tobirama activated a series of seals around the crib, monitoring jutsu that would alert him to any changes in the infant's condition, any fluctuations in the Ninetales seal, any developmental milestones that might emerge even in sleep. Then he moved to the adjacent chamber, where a water mirror, a specialized scrying technique of his own invention, displayed real-time images of Konoha. The village's recovery continued, its resilience a testament to the foundations Hashirama and Tobirama had established decades ago. New construction rose from cleared rubble. Markets reopened in temporary structures. Academy classes resumed in undamaged wings while repairs continued elsewhere. And throughout it all, life adapted to Naruto's absence. The orphanage where he had briefly resided now housed dozens of children left parentless by the Nine-Tails attack, none of them bearing the burden that had made Naruto an object of fear rather than compassion. The ANBU who had been assigned to monitor him now patrolled village perimeters, alert for external threats rather than internal ones. Even Danzo's root operatives had withdrawn from the forest of death, their search for the missing Jinchuriki redirected to other priorities. Konoha moved forward, as villages must. The loss of one orphaned infant, even one of Naruto's significance, could not halt the imperatives of survival and recovery. "They have forgotten you already," Tobirama said to the sleeping infant in the adjoining chamber. "Or rather, they have categorized you as a tragedy safely in the past, a problem resolved through absence rather than confronted directly." He deactivated the water mirror with a gesture, returning to Naruto's side. The infant slept peacefully, tiny chest rising and falling with each breath, whisker marks stark against his rounded cheeks. The seal on his stomach pulsed with gentle rhythm, Minato's design functioning perfectly to filter the Nine-Tails chakra into Naruto's system in manageable increments. "But they will remember," Tobirama promised, his voice barely audible even in the silent chamber. "When the time comes, when you are ready, and when Konoha needs you most, they will remember the child they abandoned. And they will witness what that child became under the guidance of the second Hokage." Outside, beyond the dimensional pocket that concealed Tobirama's sanctuary, the forest of death teemed with life and danger. Massive predators stalked unwary prey. Poisonous plants bloomed in vibrant warning colors. Nature, red in tooth and claw, continued its eternal cycles of creation and destruction, unconcerned with human concerns like missing Jinchuriki or village politics. And beneath it all, unknown to any living soul in Konoha, the legendary second Hokage watched over an infant who contained both the village's greatest threat and its potential salvation. An infant who would grow up knowing neither the fear nor the adulation that status as Jinchuriki typically brought. An infant who would learn from one of the most brilliant minds in shinobi history, unbound by conventional limitations or political constraints. An infant who, in time, would return to the village that had abandoned him, not seeking vengeance, but offering protection they had never provided him. The abandoned child would become the ultimate guardian, and Konoha would never be the same.